year, I'm going to be spending most of my Sundays hanging around in the youth room instead of at the pulpit. And the credentialing process for UU ministers, I think really wisely, requires that those of us aspiring to the vocation have some exposure to religious education, theory, and practice. And I'm so grateful to get to do that here this year. It's a privilege to get to learn more about how our congregations can nurture and support lifespan religious education, and a privilege to get to learn more deeply about my own faith and calling from my fellow youth advisors, and most importantly, the wise and passionate young people in this congregation. On my first Sunday with the youth a couple weeks ago, I found myself with a cohort that was, for the most part, brand new to the youth group. And Marguerite had told me that they could teach me the special way that the youth liked the chalice, but it turns out there wasn't anyone there who knew that history. So we all stared at the candle for a moment, and then I asked them, why do we light a chalice? And they had wonderful answers. They said, to mark this as a sacred space different from other places in our lives, to connect us here to what we do in the sanctuary and what other Unitarian Universalists do, or to symbolize a kind of bonfire that we're all gathered around. Also, to provide a container for safely playing with fire. And I think they meant this one literally, but ooh, there is some good symbolism there, a container for safely playing with fire. And after that discussion, I read some words that I brought with me just in case I needed them, and then we talked about how we might want to light the chalice in the future. And they said the words I brought were fine, there wasn't anything wrong with them. But they thought it would maybe be more meaningful if we took turns bringing our own words about what it is we're doing here and why we're doing it. And this was a beautiful moment, and it took me back to another instance in my experience with religious education. Back in my congregation in DC, I taught 4th and 5th grade religious education. And at the beginning of the church year, each class made a felt banner that kind of hung outside of their church classroom. And most of them had like flaming chalices, doves, peace signs, or maybe, like a globe with the like rainbow colored people holding hands around it, kind of like clip art. But my class was filled with budding chefs, and they wanted a pot roast, a loaf of bread, and a kale salad with cranberries on their banner. I tried to direct them towards more traditional UU symbols, but they just ignored me. They were undeterred, and they were led by a particularly take charge and persuasive young woman who I am convinced is going to be our president one day. And eventually, I was kind of exasperated, and I was like, this banner is going to hang in front of our classroom all year. Parents and other kids and our ministers are going to see it. What does a pot roast have to do with church? And they looked at me like I had grown a second head. The self-appointed project manager of this Sunday dinner-themed banner replied, well, my faith says we're supposed to feed people who are hungry and share food with family and friends and neighbors. And then she went back to cutting. I had no legitimate rebuttal. I was, after all, on the committee that had just installed a little free pantry on our church steps. So I started cutting out cranberries. In both of these stories, the young people that I was blessed enough to learn from were creating something new out of the history and traditions that had been passed down to them. These stories of our funny, creative, justice-minded youth are stories deeply rooted in our Unitarian Universalist values and practices, but they are also stories of imagination and new ways forward. They are stories of roots and of wings. When we talk about roots and wings in our young people, I think it's often kind of in the context of giving our young people roots and wings, right? We want to raise our children to feel connected to their family, their home, their community and church. And then we want to empower them to take risk and go out in the world and make a life of their own, which this is important and I think a core part of Unitarian Universalist religious education. But what I'm actually more interested in today is how our young people help us as a congregation and a faith stay connected to our roots and find our wings. See, Carolyn McDade's song, that is so popular with our UU congregations, was not written as an anthem or a call to action or instructions for raising children. It was initially written as a private prayer. Exhausted after another organizing meeting, it was her prayer that she could stay committed to the movement for love and justice. It was her prayer that she could stay in the work. I was tired, she said in a 2007 interview in UU World magazine, not with my community, but with the world. She says, I walked through my house in the dark, found my piano, and that was my prayer. May I not drop out. It was not written, but prayed. I knew more than anything that I wanted to continue in faith with the movement. To do that, she would need both roots and wings. This prayer feels no less relevant today. We face challenges as a congregation, a denomination, a state, a country, a global community. The recent destruction in Florida drives home how big of a challenge we face in trying to build climate resilience. And I see the exhaustion on the faces of my friends and colleagues fighting for trans kids' rights to access affirming healthcare in the state of Tennessee. And the more work we do to become authentically anti-racist as a denomination, the more we realize just how deeply white supremacy is embedded in our society. To do all of this important work, we will need to find ways to stay rooted in the values that drive our work for justice, the values that undergird our faith. We need to stay connected to our ancestors and to our history, learning from and showing gratitude for the people who came before us to pave the way. But roots aren't enough, right? Roots alone can leave us stuck in place, afraid to change, fearful of trying something new. We risk becoming fossilized. We also need wings. We need the imagination and inspiration, the spirit and courage and daring that helps us lift off to new places and follow new flight paths. But still with those strong roots to help us ensure we don't just drift away entirely, like a loose balloon floating directionlessly until it's out of sight. We need roots and wings. And these both feel especially necessary when it comes to our topic for the month of October, governance. While governance may seem miles away from the beautiful imagery McDade invokes in her prayer, I think the two are more deeply connected than we might imagine. Governance is the container that holds our work, the scaffolding for the community, and the mechanism for change. It is how we ensure we hear each other's voices and find a way to chart a path forward together. It is one of the tools we have for giving life the shape of justice. But we know that as a denomination, we have often used governance as a way to enshrine injustice. The Widening the Circle of Concern report tells us, when we talk about governance, we are talking about power. When we talk about power combined with prejudice and the centering of the dominant group and their ways of being and doing, we are talking about oppression. If we are truly committed to siding with love, to being anti-racist, to working towards justice, we are going to have to shift centers of power, invite new ways of being and doing, imagine systems and structures that do not yet exist. But this does not mean that we abandon everything we love and know about our faith. No, to respond to these changing and challenging times, it means reimagining and reconfiguring our communities so that they are even more deeply grounded in the values and principles we have always held dear. It requires roots and wings. Spirit of life, hear our prayer, give us roots and wings. I think Reverend Alice Blair Wesley says this better than I'm trying to right now. She says, in truth, the simple, transparent, potent idea of the free church has to be, time and time again, reconceived, reconstructed in human imagination, from memories of the tradition so obscured or twisted or bent out of shape over time as to be sometimes almost gone from the world. And this is why I think our youth are a part of the answer to our prayer. As those two stories I shared at the beginning of the sermon demonstrate, our young people have a special gift for reimagining how we live out our faith. They can so easily envision how to build a new house on a strong foundation. They are so well suited to this task Reverend Alice Blair Wesley calls us to. They have these memories of our faith, our values, our roots that we have passed down to them, but they have not yet held on to them so long that they've turned into fossils in their hands. For our young people, these memories are sites for new creation. They are art supplies or building materials, raw ingredients and unshapen clay. In the words of Sophia Lyon-Fawes from our opening reading, these beliefs are pliable, like the young sapling, ever growing with the upward thrust of life. It was so easy for them to imagine new ways of lighting a chalice or new symbols to represent our faith. And in witnessing their creations, I was drawn even more deeply into the rich tradition of my chosen faith. Their imagination helped me remember what it means to call myself a Unitarian Universalist. Let me be really clear, though, I am not using our youth as just merely a sermon demonstration, a colorful example, or a teaching tool. The point of this sermon is not about embracing a youthful outlook or emulating our young people's imaginations, although I don't think those are bad practices. The point is that we don't have to try and emulate our youth to get their perspective on governance or the challenges that we face as our faith and our world. They are right here. Why go for imitation when you can have the real thing? Our youth are ready and willing to help us lead this faith forward, so invite them into these conversations. Ask them to serve on committees and welcome their questions at listening sessions and congregational meetings. They aren't just our future, they are also our present. This congregation is their congregation. They are worshiping and learning and contributing, and decisions about the work of this congregation impact them too. Their voices deserve to be included, and including their voices will make this congregation stronger, more imaginative, and better equipped to truly widen the circle. In Dream of a Common Language, poet Adrienne Rich writes, "I have to cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world." As I watched our young UUs eagerly light the chalice for the first time or cut out pieces of felt food, it seemed I was watching them, little by little, reconstitute the world. From these strong, deep UU roots we share, they were sprouting wings I had not been able to imagine on my own. I, for one, am casting my lot with them. I hope you will join me. May it be so, and amen.